The story takes place in the Rome metropolitan area, located in central Italy, consisting of Rome and surrounding municipalities. Rome is the capital of Italy, and it is also the country's largest city in terms of area and the most populous, with over 2,500 years of history, making it a world-famous historical and cultural city. About 35 kilometers from downtown Rome, there is a city called Ladispoli, situated on the Mediterranean coast, boasting rich natural resources and beautiful geographical landscapes, belonging to the Rome metropolitan area. On a street in downtown Ladispoli, there is a multi-story villa with a roof that looks like two eyes and staircases on both sides resembling a big mouth, giving it a very distinctive appearance. Living in this villa is a family of 4. The husband is named Antonio, 47 years old this year, a former naval officer, currently a special agent for the Italian intelligence agency responsible for security work. His wife is named Maria, the same age as her husband, a homemaker. The couple has 1 son and 1 daughter. The son is named Federico, 23 years old this year, studying at a military academy, and he has a girlfriend. The daughter is named Martina, 20 years old this year, with the boyfriend she's been dating for 3 years. The incident on the fateful night. On a spring evening in 2015, at the villa in Ladispoli, the entire family of 4 was at home. Besides them, there were 2 others. The girlfriend of the homeowner's son Federico, named Viola, and the boyfriend of the homeowner's daughter, Martina, named Marco. They came to the villa to spend the weekend. No one expected that a crime would occur at the villa that night, and this case became a mystery that captured national attention, known as the Italian Marco mystery case. On May 17, 2015, it was a Sunday. At 11:38 p.m., the 118 Emergency Center in Ladispoli received a call. The caller was the son from the family of 4 introduced earlier, 23-year-old Federico. He spoke in a panicked tone to the operator. "Someone at my house played a prank that went too far. Now they're having a panic attack and fainted, face pale." The operator asked what kind of prank had occurred and if the injured person was conscious. Federico didn't answer directly. He stammered that he was in another room at the time, didn't see the process, so he didn't know the specific details. A moment later, a middle-aged woman took the phone and told the operator that everything was fine now, the situation was improving, and if needed, they would call back. She then hung up. Half an hour passed like that, and the time reached 12:06 midnight. The phone at the 118 Emergency Center in Ladispoli rang again, with the caller ID the same as half an hour earlier, but this time, a middle-aged man's voice was on the line, who was Federico's father, 47-year-old Antonio. He told the operator that there was a young person at home who had been stabbed in the right shoulder with a pointed comb, but the injury wasn't too serious, and they needed an ambulance now. In Italy, based on the severity of the patient's injury or illness, it is divided into 5 emergency levels. The lowest priority level is white code, indicating treatment is needed but not an emergency. The 4th priority is green code, indicating timely handling is needed but not an emergency. The 3rd priority is blue code, indicating support is needed for the emergency team. The 2nd priority is yellow code, indicating an emergency that needs to be handled as soon as possible. The highest priority is red code, indicating a critical situation that needs immediate handling. Based on what the middle-aged man who called for emergency said, the wound was not large and not serious, just needing ordinary treatment, so the emergency center operator set the emergency level to green code. At the same time, an ambulance was dispatched to the scene. 17 minutes after the emergency call, the ambulance arrived at the location of the injured person. The rescue personnel got out and saw the male homeowner, Antonio, at the door. Following the guidance, the rescue personnel went to the bathroom on the second floor, where they saw a young man lying naked in the bathtub, hair dripping wet, as if he had just taken a bath. The man's consciousness was blurred, almost unable to answer the rescue personnel's questions. After examination, there was a wound on the man's right arm, not large, similar in size to a cigarette burn. The surrounding area was quite clean, with no obvious bloodstains. This injured person was the boyfriend of the homeowner's daughter, Martina, named Marco. Marco and Martina were both 20 years old, had been dating for 3 years, and were engaged. Marco's home was not in Letispoli, but in Cerveteri, but the two homes were less than 10 kilometers apart, a drive of just over 10 minutes, not far. Marco often came to his girlfriend's house, and Martina's family was already familiar with Marco. That evening at 8 p.m., Marco arrived at the villa. At that time, Martina's parents, brother, and brother's girlfriend were all at home. Everyone was very familiar with each other. That evening, the 6 people had dinner together. At 11:15 p.m., Marco was injured in the bathroom. It wasn't until over an hour later, at 12:23 midnight, that the ambulance arrived at the villa. After the rescue personnel checked, the injured Marco had blurred consciousness. The situation was serious, completely not belonging to the green code emergency level, so on the spot, the original green code was upgraded to the highest level, red code. Because the ambulance was responding to green code, the vehicle didn't have medical equipment for handling severe injuries, so Marco was urgently sent to the local emergency station. Such emergency stations are distributed throughout Italy, playing a medical role in the emergency system for handling mild, critical, and low-complexity situations. Because the family in the villa didn't tell the truth, the doctors at the emergency station didn't know what had happened for a long time. It wasn't until after a series of examinations that they realized the wound on Marco's right arm was not from a comb stab, but a gunshot wound. The emergency station couldn't handle such a situation. At 12:54, they urgently called a medical helicopter, prepared to send Marco to the Gemelli Polyclinic in Rome with higher medical standards. Due to Marco's deteriorating condition, the plane landed twice but couldn't take Marco away. Regrettably, after more than 2 hours of resuscitation by doctors, at 3:10 a.m., the doctors declared Marco dead and beyond saving. The investigation and initial discoveries. Because Marco's death was highly suspicious, the doctors contacted the police to explain the situation. With the involvement of investigators, the case escalated from an ordinary accident to a criminal case. The family of Marco's girlfriend was suspected of concealing the truth. The forensic doctor examined Marco. A 9mm caliber bullet entered from Marco's upper right arm, then entered his body and pierced the right lung, finally reaching the heart. The bullet remained in Marco's body. There was very little external bleeding from Marco's right arm, but severe internal bleeding, and he died from hemorrhagic shock. Marco was 20 years old this year, humble and mature, a responsible young man. Marco had a cheerful personality, loved sports, and was in good health. He worked as a lifeguard at a seaside beach, once saving a family who went boating but encountered a sea storm, praised for his brave rescue. Marco liked motorcycles, was passionate about various machinery, and dreamed of joining the Air Force to become a pilot. 3 years before the case, Marco was invited to a friend's engagement party in Ladispoli, where he met Martina of the same age. The two fell in love at first sight. That night, when he got home, Marco excitedly told his parents that he had met a beautiful girl today. After that, Marco frequently went to Ladispoli to see Martina, and the two fell in love. By the time of the case, they had been in a stable relationship for 3 years. Marco's cousin, when talking about this couple, said Marco loved Martina very much. When he first introduced Martina, his face showed full happiness. Marco's parents had a good impression of Martina, feeling she was a beautiful and lively girl, very matching with their handsome son. Marco often told his parents that he must marry Martina as his wife. He had even named their future children. Although the two were only 20 years old, to outsiders, they seemed like a couple married for many years. The two maintained harmonious and close relationships with both sets of parents. Marriage was a natural progression. Marco often went to his girlfriend's house, got along well with her family, as if already one family. Marco's parents sometimes complained that their son put all his attention on his girlfriend's family, coming home later and later, sometimes just to sleep. But they were happy that their son could sincerely find someone he liked. Marco more than once introduced to his parents how good his girlfriend's family was, especially his future father-in-law, Antonio. He excitedly and proudly told his mother that his girlfriend's father, Antonio, worked at the intelligence agency. Marco's parents could clearly feel their son's honor in knowing someone like Antonio. Marco's parents and cousin all believed that Marco deeply admired his girlfriend's father, Antonio. Antonio had been in the military for many years, climbing through the ranks to become a senior officer, now transferred to the intelligence agency as an agent, specializing in security work for national politicians. Antonio always exuded a bold, fearless military aura, which made Marco, who harbored military dreams, very admiring. He regarded Antonio as his idol and role model, taking every word of Antonio as gospel. Marco wanted to enlist, yearning for his future father-in-law's recommendation, but Antonio seemed uninterested in using his connections to help Marco with the enlistment application. Even so, Marco was not discouraged. He still admired Antonio and was determined to achieve his dream through his own efforts. Conflicts in Marco and Martina's relationship, like most couples, Marco and Martina also had conflicts and arguments. Martina showed strong possessiveness in the relationship. She would occasionally check her boyfriend's social accounts and delete female friends. But these weren't big issues. Between the two, there was a bigger, more key conflict point, which was Marco's enlistment issue. 2 years before the case, Marco tried to apply for VFP1, that is, 1-year volunteer, a type of voluntary military service, a project launched by the Italian army to meet recruitment needs. Participants in this plan can receive basic military training, with a service term of 1 year. During this period, they will receive various military trainings, after which they can choose to serve in different departments and units of the Italian army. To get bonus points for VFP1, Marco obtained a sports shooting license. By the time of the case, Marco's application had been approved. A year later, he would have the opportunity to join the coveted Air Force. But Martina firmly opposed Marco enlisting. She was very dependent on her boyfriend, to the point of not being able to endure the pain of a long-distance relationship. But Marco's enlistment dream was very firm. Marco's cousin had witnessed the couple arguing once. Martina demanded that Marco always stay by her side, but Marco said enlisting was his dream and he couldn't give up this hard-won opportunity because Martina feared losing him. Marco confided to his cousin that he was torn between his girlfriend's wishes and his own dream, feeling very confused and tired. 2 months before the case, Marco and Martina were still arguing about enlisting. The two argued irreconcilably, even breaking up, but after calming down, the two reconciled as before. This incident caused a crack in their relationship. According to Margot's father's recollection, around 11 p.m. on the night of the case, Marco called him, lowering his voice to say he would stay overnight at his girlfriend's villa and return home the next day. Marco's father vaguely heard noisy voices from the phone, but didn't pay attention at the time. According to Martina, at 11 p.m. that night, after Marco finished calling his father, Marco left Martina's bedroom on the second floor and went to the bathroom on the same floor to shower. During that time, Martina entered the bathroom once, washing underwear in the sink next to the bathtub. After washing for a while, seeing her father, Antonio, about to enter the bathroom, Martina left the bathroom. Then the incident happened. According to a female neighbor's testimony, around 11 p.m. that night, she heard intermittent noisy voices from Martina's house. She could clearly hear some dialogues, including a voice that sounded like Martina's saying, "Dad, look at him, look at him." After a while, the female neighbor heard Martina say, "Marco's condition is very bad. Ask Mom and Dad what to do." Then she heard Marco say, "Sorry, Marty." Marty is Martina's nickname. At 11:15, the female neighbor heard a loud bang from Martina's house. After that, a low male voice appeared. The female neighbor, out of concern, immediately went next door, knocked on Martina's door to ask what happened. Martina's mother, Maria, opened the door. She told the female neighbor that everything was normal at home. Nothing special happened, then quickly closed the door. The neighbor, though full of questions, still returned to her own home. 23 minutes passed, reaching 11:38 p.m., Martina's brother Federico made the first 118 emergency call. Then it was hung up by his mother Maria. 28 minutes later, Antonio made another 118 emergency call. After Marco was taken away by the ambulance, Martina's mother Maria called Marco's parents, saying their son had an accident, fell from the stairs at home, and had been sent to the emergency station. Marco's parents, hearing such news in the middle of the night, felt extremely worried. They immediately dressed and rushed to the emergency station. In the emergency room, they saw their son with an oxygen mask. At that time, the couple saw Antonio and his wife Maria and their son Federico, but didn't see Martina and Federico's girlfriend, Viola. Later, Martina and Viola still arrived at the hospital just half an hour late. The doctor in charge of resuscitation told Marco's parents that the wound on Marco was not from a fall but a gunshot wound. Marco's parents were shocked upon hearing this. They questioned Federico about what exactly happened. At this point, Federico looked dazed. In his panic, he said that his father was cleaning a weapon in the bathroom, and during the process, it accidentally discharged, hitting Marco by accident. Timeline and delay in emergency response. Let's clarify the timeline for that night. Combining multiple clues, it can be determined that the time Marco was shot that night was 11:15. 23 minutes later, at 11:38, the 1118 Emergency Center received the first call. Because the female homeowner said it was fine, they dispatched a vehicle, but then canceled it. 28 minutes later, at 12:06 midnight, the 1118 Emergency Center received the second call. This time, they dispatched an ambulance, arriving at the villa at 12:23. From Marco's initial injury to the second emergency call, a full 51 minutes passed in between. By the time he was delivered to the hospital, he had been injured for over an hour. The emergency station doctor stated that the bullet did not hit the heart. If delivered to the hospital within an hour, there was a high probability of saving Marco's life. That night in the villa, besides Marco, there were 5 people present, but they delayed calling the ambulance and intentionally concealed Marco's true injury situation. If they had told the truth, the emergency center could have immediately activated Red Code. A helicopter could have transported Marco to a high-level hospital in downtown Rome within 15 minutes, giving him a great chance of survival. But the family didn't do that, causing Marco to miss the golden treatment window. After the incident, investigators sealed off the villa scene for inspection. They found Marco's clothes next to the bathtub in the bathroom, but didn't find a handgun in the bathroom. The police found a Beretta 9mm semi-automatic pistol under the bed in the homeowner's son Federico's bedroom, owned by the male homeowner Antonio. Ballistic testing confirmed this was the offending gun. So why was the gun in Federico's room? According to his own account, on the night of the case, he and his girlfriend Viola were in his room. His girlfriend was watching TV, and he was reading a book. At 11:15, he suddenly heard a loud bang from the second-floor bathroom, but didn't realize it was a gunshot. Then he went to the bathroom to check the situation and found Marco lying in the bathtub. At that time, there was no blood on Marco's body or on the floor. He thought nothing had happened. At that time in the bathroom, his father Antonio and sister Martina were also there. Later, he felt the situation might be serious, so he called 118 emergency. Later, Federico figured out the situation. His father's gun accidentally discharged and hit Marco. To prevent injuring someone again, Federico threw the gun under his bedroom bed. Personnel inspected this weapon. Strangely, no biological traces that could be used for comparison were extracted from it, indicating it had been cleaned. Combining the situation where Martina and Viola arrived at the hospital half an hour late, this speculation becomes possible. The handgun was registered under Antonio's name. He is a current intelligence agency agent involved in security work for Italy's Chief of Defense Staff General Vincenzo Comparini. As a former naval officer and current intelligence agent, Antonio would carry weapons and owned several guns. Antonio's initial statement was that he knew his prospective son-in-law admired him greatly. So a little after 11 p.m. that night, Antonio wanted to show Marco a real gun, so he took the gun into the bathroom to scare the other party, playing a prank. At that time, his daughter was also in the bathroom, after seeing Antonio come, the daughter left. Antonio pulled the slide, pretending to shoot. Unexpectedly, there was a bullet in the gun. After pulling the trigger, he accidentally hit Marco in the bathtub. Later, after a lawyer's reminder that pulling the slide is a very dangerous action, indicating subjective intent to fire, he might be charged with intentional homicide, so Antonio revised his previous testimony. He said he had several handguns, one of which, a Beretta 9mm, was placed on the bathroom shelf. That night, when Marco entered the bathroom to shower, he discovered the gun, liked it very much, so he asked Antonio to demonstrate. Antonio originally didn't want to demonstrate, but under the other's repeated requests, he reluctantly pulled the slide once. He originally thought there was no bullet in the gun, but it turned out not to be so he accidentally injured Marco. Antonio claimed this was a tragic accident. Expert analysis and doubts from the victim's family. A criminologist didn't think so. He questioned the claim of accidental discharge. First, a weapon like a handgun appearing in the bathroom is inherently unreasonable because the bathroom is often a place everyone can enter and exit, and the basic requirement for storing weapons is that it must be in a place only accessible to the gun owner or those with a gun permit. Additionally, from the storage environment perspective, the bathroom is not a suitable place to store a handgun because the bathroom's temperature and humidity will undoubtedly cause some damage to it. Antonio, as a veteran and intelligence agent, couldn't possibly not understand this and wouldn't likely make such a low-level mistake as accidental discharge injuring someone. Although the randomness in the world can't be ruled out, as there are indeed many cases in the world of accidental shootings while cleaning weapons, the criminologist pointed out that for this handgun in the bathroom to fire, not only does the chamber need a bullet, but the holder needs to pull the slide. The action of actively pulling the slide is hard to categorize as an accident. Marco's parents obviously couldn't accept Antonio's statement. They believed their son, although wanting to be a soldier, was not fanatic about weapons. Their son had a cleanliness habit, never bathed in the bathtub, only showered, and would never accept someone entering the bathroom while he was bathing. Therefore, Antonio's claim that Marco actively invited him into the bathroom to demonstrate the gun is not credible. Investigators felt the case was full of doubts. They believed Antonio was not an amateur in weapons. Placing the gun in the bathroom is fundamentally incomprehensible. At the time of the incident, he actively pulled the slide, indicating he had a clear intent to shoot. Even for demonstration, Antonio should have used it cautiously. He must take responsibility for his actions. A leather store owner named David Vannini provided testimony to the police. His testimony was very crucial, making the case even more mysterious. David said, "When I saw Marco's mother becoming more desperate on a TV program, I realized I had to live up to my conscience, not live in regret. But telling the truth is hard because it involves one of my best friends." Davide mentioned this good friend named Roberto Ezzo. In Italy, the Carabinieri and police both belong to law enforcement structures with similar duties. Comparatively, the Carabinieri have a military color. Roberto is the captain of the local Carabinieri in La Dispoli. After the Marco case occurred, based on territorial principles, Roberto and his subordinates were responsible for handling the case. Coincidentally, Roberto and Antonio not only knew each other, but were good friends for many years with a good relationship. Therefore, some questioned whether Antonio used his relationship with Roberto to bribe him. In the early stages of the case investigation, Roberto's investigation was ineffective. leading to many details of the case not being clarified. But Davide's testimony seemed to confirm this and pointed the case in a new direction. Davide believed that the person who fired the shot that night was not Antonio, but his son, Federico. The store owner, Davide, said that one day after the case occurred, Roberto came to his leather store looking in a bad mood. Roberto told him he had messed up something, and this matter concerned a person's death. Even if this could be corrected, his conscience always found it hard to accept. This mistake might make him guilty for life. Davide, hearing Roberto say that, immediately became interested and quickly asked Roberto what exactly happened. After a moment of hesitation, Roberto finally spoke. He said on the day the Marco case happened, Antonio had called him, saying there was some situation at home. His daughter's boyfriend was injured in the bathroom, so he wanted Roberto to help. When Roberto asked what the specific situation was, Antonio replied that he had caused big trouble. "You must help me." Roberto replied at the time that he needed to think about it. After learning this clue, investigators checked Antonio's call records and found that after Federico's first emergency call, Antonio did call Ribeiro. The leather store owner Davide later asked Roberto if, when arriving at the emergency station, he asked Antonio what exactly happened at home and why other family members didn't arrive. Roberto pondered for a moment, then vaguely answered that they must have been busy cleaning the house. That's why they were late. Based on Marco's parents' testimony, Martina and Viola arrived at the emergency station at least 20 minutes later than Antonio's couple and Federico. Therefore, Davide had reason to believe the two girls might have followed Antonio's instructions to clean the crime scene at home. This also explained why investigators later surveyed the scene and found almost no valuable clues. Many places couldn't extract fingerprints. Suspicions about Federico's role and other clues. Because Davide's testimony involved some undiscovered information, they further investigated Davide and Roberto. 6 months before the case, Roberto had brought Antonio to Davide's leather store to custom make a gun holster, so Davide also knew Antonio. Davide recalled that Roberto had said he met someone who could change his life when he retired. Davide believed that person was Antonio. Davide guessed that on the night of the case, Antonio immediately contacted Roberto and sought help, trying to minimize the impact of Marco's death on the family, and as a return for Roberto's help, Antonio would try to facilitate the soon-to-retire him to transfer to the Intelligence Security Department with higher pension. Regarding Davide's speculation, Roberto denied it outright. He scolded Davide for slandering him. Roberto stated that the handling of the Marco case was legal and compliant. He had no sheltering behavior. As a law enforcement officer, he would never obstruct judicial justice for personal gain. Davide's claims of interest exchange and taking the blame were all baseless speculations. The leather store owner Davide's inference was astonishing, but not entirely unreasonable. It was based on some clues he knew. However, to establish it, more evidence was needed. Investigators discovered that when Marco was taken to the emergency station, the t-shirt he was wearing was not his, but Federico's. Therefore, many supported Davide's speculation, believing Federico was the real culprit in Marco's death, and Antonio was just protecting his son by saying he fired the shot. Federico was 23 years old this year, studying at a military school in Naples, Italy. The school is one of Italy's oldest military education institutions. Federico majored in weapons knowledge at school, with excellent grades, and yet to have the inherit his father Antonio's mantle, with a bright future ahead. Because there were no fingerprints on the handgun, and Antonio himself admitted he fired it, and the statements of the 5 family members were basically consistent, no evidence was found that Federico was the killer. The rescue personnel that night said that after entering the bathroom, they approached and asked Marco his name and what happened. At this time, Marco's consciousness was blurred. Answering questions was very difficult. He couldn't say complete sentences, just repeatedly saying, "very uncomfortable, very painful." The rescue personnel and emergency station doctors that night all said that Antonio had asked them not to mention Marco's gunshot wound, otherwise his future would be ruined. The 118 operator that night said that when receiving the first call, in the background, a middle-aged woman was heard saying someone was bathing in the bathtub. Then that woman took the phone and said it was fine. When receiving the second call, the operator heard a man scream from afar, "Enough, please, enough." Was the second-floor bathroom of the villa that night really the first crime scene? Was Marco really accidentally shot? Actually, not necessarily. The villa where the case occurred is a standalone villa, not connected to other houses. The bang the neighbor heard couldn't determine from which specific room it came. Gunpowder particles were detected on the victim Marco's body. Gunpowder particles were also found on his shoes, but the shoes were not found in the bathroom, but in Martina's room. Besides Marco, among the other 5 people in the villa that night, Antonio, Federico, Martina had gunpowder particles detected on them. Maria and Viola did not have gunpowder particles detected. Based on the above clues, theoretically, there is a possibility that Marco that night was not shot while bathing, as the family said, but was shot while fully dressed, and even the first crime scene might not be in the bathroom. Marco, Martina, Antonio, Federico might have been in the same space at the time of the incident. Additionally, although Maria and Viola had no gunpowder particles detected, it doesn't mean they weren't together at the time. The reason is that investigators failed to sample the whole house in time, collect their clothes, leading to the 5 people having time to cover up the truth. From the incident to filing the case, a long time passed. That night, Martina and Viola were also half an hour late to the emergency station, possibly following the male homeowner Antonio's instructions to clean the scene. The t-shirt Marco wore when sent to the hospital was Federico's. Although Marco's pants had no visible bloodstains to the naked eye, the luminol test was positive, meaning it had blood but was cleaned. Marco's mother said her son went out that day wearing a dark blue t-shirt to work. But Federico said that day Marco got off work wearing a lifeguard vest to the villa. Before Marco was taken away by the ambulance, Federico put his own clothes on him because he didn't know where Marco's clothes were, so Marco wore Federico's clothes at the emergency station. The trial and final verdict. After Marco's death, Antonio's family accepted questioning from investigators. Before the questioning, they had a conversation. Monitoring equipment recorded their reactions, which might help us understand what happened that night. In April 2018, 3 years after the case opened at the First Circuit Court in Rome. After the trial, the court issued a verdict. Defendant Antonio guilty of intentional homicide, sentenced to 14 years imprisonment. Maria, Federico, and Martina for conspiracy, respectively sentenced to 9 years and 4 months imprisonment. Federico's girlfriend, Viola, was acquitted. After the first trial ended, except for Viola, the 4 defendants did not accept the verdict and appealed. 9 months later, the Second Circuit Appeals Court in Rome issued the second trial verdict, Defendant Antonio not guilty of intentional homicide, but guilty of manslaughter, sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. The other 3 sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. After the second trial ended, the victim Marco's family couldn't accept such a result. They refused to give up and later appealed to the Italian Supreme Court. Before the final trial, Federico responded to some controversies through the media. He said he had never had enough time to clarify some false rumors. Those accusations against him made him doubly painful. He had kept silent before because he didn't know what to do, so he chose to leave everything to the law. He only hoped the court's final verdict could be completely based on truth and justice, without pressure from media or public opinion. The victim Marco's mother was very dissatisfied with Federico's statement. She said for a full 6 years, he had 6 years to tell the truth, to defend himself. But he didn't. Indeed, until today, he is only lying. 1 month before the Supreme Court's final verdict, Federico opened a personal Facebook account and intensively posted content related to the Marco case. He believed the Marco case was subject to too much compromise from public opinion and politics. Some media and politicians used the influence of the Marco case to gain benefits by criticizing his family. Federico described himself as a person persecuted by the law. He said, "Unless the media no longer depicts me as a monster, no longer turns reality into a mystery, otherwise justice will always not exist, and the corresponding punishment is also inappropriate." Federico frequently posted videos on Facebook. He admitted he misjudged Marco's injury that night and failed to properly help Marco. But being characterized as intentional homicide is absurd. Federico said he didn't keep lying, as public opinion said. That night, he not only didn't realize there was a shooting, but also didn't see blood on Marco. So that night, he mistakenly thought Marco had a panic attack from hearing the bang. What he said in the first emergency call was all true. Netizens didn't agree with this description. Everyone left messages on Federico's Facebook accusing him of avoiding the important and dwelling on the trivial. Federico, as an excellent military school student, mastered rich weapons knowledge. Whether he could recognize the gunshot that night aside, but Marco's physical condition was very bad is an undisputed fact. In the emergency call recording, Marco's painful voice appeared, self-evident. In this situation, the family still thought Marco's injury wasn't serious, truly unable to convince people. When talking about his father, Antonio, Federico said he naively believed his words and said his father must pay the price for what he did. Shortly after Marco's death, Antonio sent a photo of Marco on WhatsApp with the caption, "Eternal Guilt." He and his daughter Martina multiple times sent messages to Marco's family expressing a desire to meet, but were refused. Marco's cousin believed if they were willing to immediately tell the truth, then meeting would be no problem. But now they are covering for each other. This won't work. Marco's family insisted that the indifferent reaction of Antonio's family after Marco was injured is unforgivable. If they had told the truth from the beginning, Marco could have been sent to the hospital immediately, perhaps avoiding this tragedy. In May 2021, 6 years after the case, the Italian Supreme Court issued the final verdict on this case. Defendant Antonio guilty of intentional homicide. The Supreme Court overturned the second trial verdict, upholding the original first trial verdict, Antonio sentenced to 14 years imprisonment. Maria, Federico, and Martina sentenced to 9 years and 4 months imprisonment. The court believed Antonio's performance after the case was almost ruthless, always trying hard to conceal facts after the harm occurred. In the final verdict, Antonio was considered the main person responsible for the Marco case, an intentional homicide. His wife Maria, son Federico, and daughter Martina were accomplices in the crime. The faults of the three mainly manifested in awe of the family head Antonio and incorrect obedience. After realizing what happened, they chose to conceal facts, shelter Antonio, ultimately leading to the tragedy. Martina not only didn't help her boyfriend, but chose to shelter her father. After the final verdict, Antonio issued a statement accepting the verdict. I ask for forgiveness for what I did and didn't do. I know I am not the victim, but I bear full responsibility for this tragedy. Marco was a good young man. His death is my irreparable fault. In the Marco case, Antonio's family received one-sided blame from public opinion. After the final verdict, the Italian government revoked the Order of Merit of the Italian Republic Knight honor that Antonio received in 2008. In the early stage of imprisonment, Martina's weight dropped sharply, very haggard. She kept asking when we can get out. This is unfair. We didn't want Marco to die either. Later, Martina also adapted to the rather harsh prison life. Later, Martina was transferred to the Rebibbia prison with better conditions in downtown Rome, able to live and work in a cell with a balcony. She also started dating a new boyfriend. The other party often visited her in prison. From the 2015 case occurrence to the 2021 final trial, it took a full 6 years, during which nearly 40 hearings were held, attracting high attention from the entire Italian public. Marco's family persistently followed the judicial process, never giving up seeking justice for Marco. On Marco's grave, his parents placed beautiful roses and sunflowers. They told their son that the persistence over these 6 years finally brought justice. This heartbroken mother, together with her husband, exhausted all efforts to persist through the entire judicial process. Marco's mother was awarded the Women's Courage Award. In this case, although Marco suffered a gunshot wound, he could have been saved. What we can confirm is that a young man lost his life due to a group of people's inhumane behavior. But what we cannot confirm is what exactly happened in the villa that night.